The three Invincible-class battlecruisers were built for the Royal Navy and entered service in 1908 as the world's first battlecruisers. They were the brainchild of Admiral Sir John Fisher, the man who had sponsored the construction of the world's first all-big-gun warship, HMS Dreadnought. He visualized a new breed of warship, somewhere between the armored cruiser and battleship. It would have the armament of the latter, but the high speed of the former. This combination would allow it to chase down most ships, while allowing it to run from more powerful designs. This design philosophy would prove to be most successful when the Invincibles were able to use the speed to run down smaller and weaker ships. The classic example was during World War I at the Battle of the Falkland Islands, where Invincible and Inflexible sank the German armored cruisers, SMS Scharnhorst and SMS Gneisenau. Despite numerous hits by the German ships, Inflexible and Invincible incurred very few casualties among the crews. They were least successful when standing in the main line of battle where they faced enemy battleships. An example is the loss of Invincible to a magazine explosion during the Battle of Jutland about 18 months after her success in the Falklands. Although this explosion owed more to flaws in British ammunition handling practices that exposed numerous cordite charges to a fire in one of her gun turrets, than any flaws in the design of the ship. After the loss of Invincible, the two surviving ships had an uneventful time for the rest of the war, conducting patrols of the North Sea as the High Seas Fleet was forbidden to risk any more losses. They were put into reserve in early 1919 and sold for scrapping on the 1st of December 1921. Design. After Admiral Fisher was appointed First Sea Lord on the 21st of October 1904, he pushed through the Board of Admiralty in early December 1904 a decision to arm the next armored cruiser with 12-inch guns and that it would have a speed no less than 25.5 knots. Shortly afterwards he convened a Committee on Designs to investigate and report on requirements for future ships. While nominally independent, it served to validate decisions already made and to deflect criticism of Fisher and the Board of Admiralty, as it had no ability to consider options other than those already decided upon by the Admiralty. Fisher appointed all of the members of the committee and himself as president of the committee. During its last meeting on the 22nd of February 1905, it decided on the outline design of the fast armored cruiser. This, in turn, was approved by the board on the 16th of March with only minor changes, such as the reduction in the anti-torpedo boat armament from 20 to 18 12 PDI guns. General characteristics. The Invincible-class ships were formerly known as armored cruisers until 1911, when they were redesignated as battlecruisers by an Admiralty order of the 24th of November 1911. Unofficially, a number of designations were used until then, including cruiser, battleship, dreadnought cruiser, and battle cruiser. The Invincibles were significantly larger than their armored cruiser predecessors of the Minotaur class. They had an overall length of 567 feet, a beam of 78.5 feet, and a draft of 30 feet at deep load. They displaced 17,250 long tons at load and 20,420 long tons at deep load, nearly 3,000 long tons more than the earlier ships. Propulsion. Early in the design process, the Committee on Designs had thought to power these ships with the traditional reciprocating vertical triple expansion steam engines, but were persuaded to adopt Parsons steam turbines as they required fewer boilers for the same amount of power, were easier to protect from damage as they were more compact than reciprocating engines, and could be kept below the waterline. In addition, they were significantly lighter and more reliable than the older design. The direct-drive turbines then in use did have one significant drawback in that they ran at a relatively high speed which required small diameter, fine-pitch propellers of a large blade area which adversely affected maneuverability at low speeds. Parsons alleviated this problem by his suggestion of fitting more powerful astern turbines on all four shafts which could increase maneuverability by reversing the turbines as needed. An additional solution was to fit twin balanced rudders behind each inner shaft in contrast to the single central rudder used on earlier ships. This greatly increased the effectiveness of the rudder and substantially decreased the turning circle of the Invincibles in comparison to earlier ships of the size. The Invincibles had two paired sets of Parsons turbines housed in separate engine rooms. Each set consisted of a high-pressure head and a stern turbine driving an outboard shaft, and a low-pressure head and a stern turbine driving an inner shaft. A cruising turbine was also coupled to each inner shaft, although these were not used often and were eventually disconnected. Each shaft drove a propeller 11 feet in diameter. The turbines were designed to produce a total of 41,000 shaft horsepower, but reached nearly 47,000 shp during trials in 1908. Designed speed was 25 knots, but all three bettered 26 knots during trials. Indomitable maintained an average speed of 25.3 knots for 3 days during a passage of the North Atlantic in August 1908. The steam plant consisted of 31 Yarrow Babcock and Amp Wilcox large tube boilers arranged in 4 boiler rooms. Maximum bunkerage was approximately 3,000 long tons of coal, with an additional 725 long tons of fuel oil to be sprayed on the coal to increase its burn rate. At full fuel capacity, the ships could steam for 3,090 nautical miles at a speed of 10 knots. Armament each carried 8 BL-12-inch MKX guns in 4 hydraulically powered BVIII twin turrets, except for Invincible, which mounted her guns in 2 BX and 2 BX electrically driven turrets. 2 turrets were mounted fore and aft on the centerline, identified as A and X respectively. 2 turrets were mounted amidships between the second and third funnels, identified as P and Q. P turret was mounted on the port side and normally faced forward. Q turret was mounted on the starboard side and normally faced aft. P and Q turrets were staggered. P was forward of Q, enabling P to fire in a limited arc to the starboard side and Q to likewise fire in a limited arc towards the port side. These were the same guns as those mounted in the British HMS Dreadnought, the Lord Nelson class and the Bellerophon class, and for a brief period the Invincibles equaled the firepower of any other nation's battleships. The guns could initially be depressed to -3 degrees and elevated to 13.5 degrees, although the turrets were modified to allow 16 degrees of elevation during World War I. They fired 850-pound projectiles at a muzzle velocity of 2,725 feet per second at 13.5 degrees. This provided a maximum range of 16,450 meters with armor-piercing 2 CRH shells. At 16 degrees elevation, the range was extended to 20,435 yards using the more aerodynamic but slightly heavier 4 CRH shells. The rate of fire of these guns was 1 to 2 rounds per minute. The ships had a total of 880 rounds during wartime for 110 shells per gun. The ship's secondary armament initially was intended to consist of 18 3-inch 12 PDI guns, but firing trials against the old destroyer Skate in 1906 showed that the 12 PDR gun had little chance of stopping a destroyer or torpedo boat before it got close enough to fire its torpedoes. The originally intended 12-pounder guns were exchanged for 16 4-inch QFMK-3 guns early in the construction process. They were positioned in the superstructure and on turret roofs in open mounts as they were not expected to be manned in a ship-to-ship engagement during daylight. During 1914-15 the turret roof guns were transferred to the superstructure and the total number of guns was reduced to 12. All of the remaining guns were enclosed in casemates and given blast shields at the time to better protect the gun crews from weather and enemy action. The guns on the Pi** mounts had a maximum depression of 10 degrees and a maximum elevation of 20 degrees. They fired 25-pound projectiles at a muzzle velocity of 2,300 to 2,370 feet per second at 20 degrees. This provided a maximum range of 9,600 yards using common pointed shells. The rate of fire was 8 to 10 rounds per minute. These guns were replaced by 12 4-inch BLMKIX guns on CPI mountings on Inflexible during 1917. They could depress 10 degrees and elevate to 30 degrees. They fired 31-pound shells at a muzzle velocity of 2,625 feet per second to a maximum range of 13,500 yards at a rate of fire of 10 to 12 rounds per minute. The QFMK-3 guns were replaced by 12 4-inch BLMK-7 guns on PVI mountings on Indomitable during 1917. These guns could depress 7 degrees and elevate to 15 degrees. They fired 31-pound shells at a muzzle velocity of 2,864 feet per second, which gave a maximum range of 11,600 yards. The rate of fire was 6 to 8 rounds per minute. An additional gun was fitted on Indomitable in April 1917 as an anti-aircraft gun. It was mounted on a Mk2 high-angle mounting with a maximum elevation of 60 degrees. It had a reduced propellant charge with a muzzle velocity of only 2,864 feet per second. Earlier anti-aircraft guns included a 3-pounder Hotchkiss gun on a high-angle MKIC mounting with a maximum elevation of 60 degrees. Both Invincible and Indomitable carried theirs from November 1914 to August 1917. It fired 3.3-pound projectiles at a muzzle velocity of 1,873 feet per second, at a rate of fire of 20 rounds per minute. This provided a maximum range of 7,600 yards at 45 degrees, but the maximum effective anti-aircraft range was only 1,200 yards. Each of the Invincibles was also fitted with a single QF 3-inch 20 hundredweight AA gun on a high-angle MKII mount at the aft end of the superstructure. This had a maximum depression of 10 degrees and a maximum elevation of 90 degrees. It fired a 12.5-pound shell at a muzzle velocity of 2,500 feet per second at a rate of fire of 12 to 14 rounds per minute. They had a maximum effective ceiling of 23,500 feet. Gardner and Gray quote an additional 7 Maxim guns, but this cannot be confirmed. 5 18-inch submerged torpedo tubes were mounted on the Invincibles, 2 on each side and 1 in the stern, and 14 torpedoes were carried. Fire control. The spotting tops at the head of the fore and main masts controlled the fire of the Invincible's main guns. Data from a 9-foot bar and stroud rangefinder was input into a Dumaresque mechanical computer and electrically transmitted to Vickers range clocks, located in the transmitting station located beneath each spotting top, where it was converted into range and deflection data for use by the guns. The target's data was also graphically recorded on a plotting table to assist the gunnery officer in predicting the movement of the target. Each gun turret had its own transmission equipment, and the turrets, transmitting stations, and spotting tops could be connected in almost any combination. Firing trials against Hero in 1907 revealed this system's vulnerability to gunfire, as the spotting top was hit twice and a large splinter severed the voice pipe and all wiring running along the mast. To guard against this possibility, a turret was fitted with a 9-foot rangefinder at the rear of the turret roof, and it was equipped to control the entire main armament during refits between 1911 and 1914. Fire control technology advanced quickly during the years immediately preceding World War I, and the development of the Dreyer fire control table was one such advance. It combined the functions of the Dumaresque and the range clock in a simplified version. The MKI was fitted to the Invincibles during refits in 1915-16. The more important development was the director firing system. This consisted of a fire control director mounted high in the ship, which electrically provided gun data to the turrets via pointers, which the turret crewman only had to follow. The director officer fired the guns simultaneously, which aided in spotting the shell splashes and minimized the effects of the roll on the dispersion of the shells. Invincible was the first battlecruiser to receive this system during her refit from April to August 1914, but its installation was interrupted by the outbreak of the war, and it was not fully working until after the Battle of the Falkland Islands in November. Indomitable and Inflexible didn't receive the systems until May 1916, immediately before the Battle of Jutland. Protection. The armor protection given to the Invincibles, the waterline belt measured 6 inches amidships, was only slightly more than half the thickness of Dreadnought's 11 inches. The belt was 6 inches thick roughly between the fore and aft 12-inch gun turrets, but was reduced to 4 inches from the fore turret to the bow, but did not extend after the rear turret. A 6-inch bulkhead met the barbette of X turret to fully enclose the armored citadel. The gun turrets and barbettes were protected by 7 in of armor, except for the turret roofs, which used 3 in of Krupp non-cemented armor. The thickness of the main deck was 1 in around the base of barbettes and the crown of the base of the rear conning tower. It was 2 in over the crown of the base of the forward conning tower. The lower deck armor was 1.5 in on the flat and 2 inches thick on the slope, except after the rear turret, where it was increased to 2.5 in to protect the steering gear. The front and sides of the forward conning tower were 10 in thick, while its rear was 7 in. The walls of the rear conning tower were 6 inches thick. The roof and floor of both conning towers were KNC armor 2 inches thick, while the communication tubes were 3 in of KNC. The signal tower immediately after the forward conning tower also had 3 inches of KNC. Mild steel torpedo bulkheads of 2.5-inch thickness were fitted abreast the magazines and shell rooms. Krupp cemented armor was used throughout, unless otherwise mentioned. Aircraft. By 1918 the two surviving Invincibles carried a Sopwith pup and a Sopwith 1.5 strutter on flying-off ramps fitted on top of P and Q turrets. Each platform had a canvas hangar to protect the aircraft during inclement weather. Construction. The three Invincibles were ordered at the same time as Dreadnought as part of the 1905-06 naval program. The following table gives the build details and purchase cost of the members of the Invincible class. Whilst standard British practice at the time was for these costs to exclude armament and stores, for some reason the cost quoted in the Naval Annual for this class includes armament. * estimated cost, including guns. Early career. All three ships entered service from the second half of 1908. Initially, Invincible and Inflexible were assigned to the home fleet, while Indomitable took the Prince of Wales to the Tercentennial celebrations in Canada, before also joining the home fleet. Invincible's electrically driven turrets proved to be a failure despite two lengthy refits in 1909 and 1911 and were converted to hydraulic power during her refit in early 1914 at the enormous cost of £151,200. The situation was so bad during her gunnery trials in October 1908 that the captain of HMS Excellent, the Royal Navy's gunnery school, described their operation thusly: when the order was given to train the turret elevator runner gun in or out, it was only necessary to push a button or move a switch, but the result was often a flash of blue flame which seemed to fill the turret. In 1914, Invincible was refitting in England, while Inflexible and Indomitable, together with the newer Indefatigable, formed the nucleus of the Mediterranean Fleet, where Inflexible served as flagship from November 1912. It was in the Mediterranean that the first naval action of the First World War took place, when the British pursued the German warships Goeben and Breslau upon the outbreak of war.